The United States and China held a historic summit meeting on the 19th to discuss the future of the bilateral relationship between the two giants. Recent years have seen the two engaging in a quiet rivalry in economic relations and regional security, with China's growing global influence. And the summit meeting was an important event which set the direction of the bilateral relationship as one of strategic and economic cooperation. Let's join our experts to find out more about the outcomes of the summit and its implications for the Korean Peninsula after the newsreel.
Chinese President Hu Jintao visited Washington to hold a summit meeting with President Barack Obama of the United States on the 19th. The U.S.-China joint statement released after the summit outlined their agreement to seek a mutually beneficial consensus for further cooperation in the global economy and regional security. With regard to the current situation on the Korean Peninsula, the two agreed that North Korea's nuclear development programs, especially in uranium enrichment, was a breach of international agreements and posed a threat to global security. They agreed to actively pursue the resumption of the six-party talks to deal with the issue. The two sides also agreed to strengthen macroeconomic communication and cooperation, with the U.S. agreeing to more responsible fiscal policies and China to promote exchange rate reform. At the same time, China presented the U.S. with a $45 billion import deal, responding to the U.S.'s long-held request to expand its domestic demand for more balanced trade relations.
Welcome back. We have two experts in the studio to discuss this highly important summit meeting between the United States and China and its implications. Joining on my right is Professor Tong Kim. Professor Kim is an adjunct professor of Korean Studies at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. It's good to see you on the show, Professor Kim.
Thank you.
On my left is Professor Brian Myers. Professor Myers is the Dean of the International Department at Dongso University. Welcome back to the program, Professor Myers.
It's always good to be here.
Let's start with the current state of the relations between the United States and China. Many people are saying that the relations between the two countries has become sour in recent decades, in recent years, as they confront with each other over issues such as foreign exchange rates and trade imbalances, human rights, and how to deal with North Korean provocations. And this summit meeting was taking place when their relationship was not at its best. So what was the significance of this summit meeting? Well, what were the major achievements of this summit meeting, Professor Kim?
Well, I would say if you ask what is the current state of the relationship between the two countries, that has changed before and after this particular summit has taken place. In other words, as a result of the latest summit between Obama and Hu Jintao, both countries, I would say, have become a lot closer to each other in terms of cooperation and coordination, as they said in their joint statement and their press conferences, to work together on a lot of issues, including, of course, regional issues. That should include the North Korean issue as well, but not only just the security issues, but also the global economic issues, trade issues. But I think they were focusing more on their bilateral issues in terms of how they're going to define the future relationship between the two countries and how they're going to cooperate each other on a lot of other global issues. I will stop here and I will pick up at the next opportunity that we can talk about it.
Okay. Professor Myers, after the summit meeting, the two countries issued a joint statement containing more than 40 points, actually, that deal with really a wide range of issues. So how would you summarize the general direction of this joint statement?
Well, I would say the general direction of the joint statement was towards kind of bland and innocuous reiterations of shared values, the kinds of things that the United States and China agree on. Even if you weren't expecting very much from this summit, and I certainly wasn't, it was kind of a disappointing document. There's very little paraphrasable sense in it. And of course, the economy really stole the show. I think that's where the focus of both of the presidents lay. So there really wasn't enough in there in terms of the kind of security issues that we on the peninsula, I think, care more about.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Professor Kim, in South Korea, in Korea here, what concerns us the most was the U.S.-China agreements on issues related to North Korean issues, to North Korea. Mm-hmm. And what were the specific agreements that they reached during the summit?
Now, by and large, there was specific statements, but nevertheless, there was no concrete agreement between the two leaders regarding what specific conditions they would need to restart the six-party talks, for example. All they said was, of course, they agreed on one point, that is, prior to the resumption of the talks, there at least should be improved inter-Korean relations. North Korea now proposing a military leadership talks, that is defense ministerial talks, and I think South Koreans have accepted that, and how it's going to play out, we will have to see. But again, there's things, and even Obama had stated that he had told Hu Jintao that North Koreans must avoid provocations, further provocations in the future, but and he said they agreed on this point, but nevertheless, Hu Jintao never stated that, and joint statement doesn't say anything about it. All they said was they're going to cooperate to resolve these issues through the process of six-party talks, but nevertheless, the Chinese has different interests in restarting the six-party talks. So there's a whole complications right there.
Anyways, Professor Kim, Professor Myers, actually, both countries agreed to resume the six-party talk as soon as possible, and both countries agreed that inter-Korean dialogue should precede the six-party talk, and North Koreans proposed for high-level military talk, to which South Korea responded positively, as Professor Kim mentioned. And it seems that there is going to be a meeting of defense ministers between South Korea and North Korea pretty soon. And can we say that we are on the right track? Do you think we can cross this first hurdle to move forward to the resumption of the six-party talk?
I'm kind of pessimistic about this because we've seen this pattern with the North Koreans before. They move to the brink and then they step back from the brink by suggesting that talks take place. And as Professor Kim pointed out, they've been making noises in this direction for a couple weeks now. The really interesting thing about these discussions is the way in which the North Koreans said in advance that they would be ready to talk about the sinking of the Cheonan and the artillery attack on Yeonpyeong. But we don't know what that means. They could very well simply go into the talks and say, we didn't sink the Cheonan and the Yeonpyeong Island attack was your fault, in which case we'd be right back at square one again. Mm-hmm. And there's a very high likelihood of that happening, in my opinion. So I'm a little bit pessimistic about that. Mm-hmm. As for denuclearization, that's something that these two defense ministers, that Kim Young-chun and his South Korean counterpart, would not really be able to talk about in any case. Mm-hmm. So we're not going to see much progress on that front.
Do you agree with Professor Myers?
Yeah, I would also think there would not be much progress out of this particular military channel, but nevertheless, I think North Korea might come forward with a statement of assurance against future provocations. But I would agree that North Koreans will not admit the responsibility for the sinking of Cheonan, for example, but they would nevertheless explain their views, their own version of what had happened on the first Yeonpyeong incident. But I don't think they're going to. They will take responsibility. They did it, and they will say because they were provoked to do that. I think that's the insistence they will come up with. But again, if they assure prevention of future occurrences, that may satisfy some needs that South Korean government might have to move forward. And as the Ministry of Unification has already stated, that they want to find out whether North Koreans are serious enough or sincere in terms of their intent to denuclearize their country will get rid of their nuclear weapons. So I think there's one way to find out how serious or insincere North Koreans might be, and you do not know unless you talk to them about it. Another thing is, throughout the Obama's meeting with Hu Jintao, there was no mention of the question of sincerity on the part of North Koreans regarding this nuclear talks, for example. So the whole thing is, although both countries are committed to resolve the issue through a dialogue and multilateral six-party talks, but nevertheless, China's point, their primary interest is to maintain stability and peace on the Korean Peninsula, because that is conducive to their interest in terms of their continued economic development. And that's why they were giving so much emphasis on that. The second interest, the Chinese second interest would be to keep the North Korean regime in survival. In other words, it serves the Chinese interest to see the status quo continues, because the last thing China wants is the collapse of a North Korean regime. And lastly, thirdly, I should say, I think China is sincere in their interest to see the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, but nevertheless, Chinese do not, I don't think, believe North Korean weapons are aimed at themselves. So therefore, it's not really an urgent issue at all. But by having six-party talks resumed, it would be a good forum for Chinese to use it as a means of diffusing tension on the Korean Peninsula, as going back to its primary interest to stabilize the Korean Peninsula. Because while you engage North Koreans and other South Koreans and others involved in the six-party process, it's going to be hard to expect North Korean would stop provocating again.
Okay. Speaking of China's stance toward nuclear programs in North Korea, analysts are saying that one notable change in China's stance toward the North Korean nuclear weapons program is that if you take a look at joint statements, previously Chinese officials are saying that North Korea's uranium program was not a concern, but in joint statement they agreed that North Korea's uranium program is a concern. So can we interpret this as a positive sign, or do you think that we can take this issue of uranium program to UN Security Council? What is your take on that?
I don't think it's a really big step forward. I mean, when you think of the fact that we now have very firm proof, the North Koreans themselves have said they have a uranium enrichment program, and when you think of what the North Koreans got up to last year on the Peninsula in terms of the Cheonan sinking and the Yeonpyeong-do attack, that statement really was very, very weak. And I think the North Koreans must have been quite relieved when they saw that joint statement, in as much as the WikiLeaks disclosures that we heard a couple of weeks ago might have instilled in the North Koreans a certain doubt as to whether the Chinese really are fully on their side. I think they came out of this, I think this joint statement is nothing that the North Koreans need to be worried about at all. Of course, the South Koreans are also relieved because the United States did not call for unconditional resumption of the six-party talks, which is what the South Koreans were worried that the Americans might do. Instead, President Obama said that both sides should take the necessary steps that are needed in order for the resumption of six-party talks. And that could very well be interpreted as calling on the North Koreans to do what the South Koreans want. In other words, to express contrition for the Yeonpyeong-do Island attack and to make some kind of statement that further provocations are not going to take place.
Let's talk about military cooperation. They talked about, they discussed it during the summit meeting. They agreed to enhance communication in military cooperation, but it seems to me that it's a lot easier said than done. I mean, to enhance military cooperation. So how do you foresee military cooperation between the two countries?
Yeah, between China and the United States. Well, enhancing cooperation is a very vague concept. That could pretty much mean anything from simply establishing some kind of hotline and letting people know when military exercises are going to take place. The Americans have always been, I think, very sensitive to China's concerns in regard to military exercises that take place here on the peninsula. As you know, last year the Americans acceded to China's request to shift those military exercises that were taking place in the West Sea after the Cheonan sinking from the West Sea to the East Sea. And I think in light of this joint statement, the Americans are probably going to continue to take efforts to make sure that China does not take undue offense from whatever military exercises are taking place here. I don't know what Professor Kim thinks about that.
Well, I would think, as Obama said himself, as long as China grows peaceful, he put emphasis on the word peaceful growth. And even military growth is fine as long as China would not see confrontation or conflicts, but behave as a part of the international norm and also as a responsible member of the international community, and thus contributing to stability and peace rather than any confrontations. And U.S. would welcome. And I think there will be a lot of military exchanges. I mean, following up Bob Gates' visit to Beijing last week, and I think there was some Chinese military leaders who would visit Washington, and there are a whole host of different issues that both militaries are interested in discussing, whereas U.S. military is forthcoming, show more interest in talking to Chinese, but Chinese are a little bit reluctant to discuss in a transparent way of what their plans are, what they want to do in the future, and that is the concern, and that's all the more reason the United States wants to maintain military contacts with China. Now, I'd like to go back to the topic of uranium enrichment a little bit. As you can see, the both leaders only just expressed the concern about North Korea's alleged or their claimed uranium enrichment. And of course, North Korea claimed that there would be energy production, not for just like the Iranians been advocating or insisting upon the purpose of their uranium enrichment program. But that's not the.
Professor Kim, but do you think China would agree to take this issue to the UN Security Council?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it came when South Korean President Lee Myung-bak said UN Security Council should deal with this issue, and obviously trying to at least some condemnation in terms of a breaching of North Korea's obligations and its commitments according to previous international agreements, including the September 19 joint statement. But on this thing, for example, I mean, there are a lot of disparities between the joint statement and what President Obama actually said in press conference. For example, what was not included in the joint statement, President Obama chose to speak through the press conference what Chinese did not agree to. So, for example, the North Korean nuclear weapons, particularly uranium enrichment program, was a breach of North Korea's commitments and obligations. China didn't agree to that. And it's Obama who claimed that international community should continue to speak clearly that this is North Korea's violation of their own wars. So there are a lot of subtle differences, but nevertheless, so on North Korea, I should say, there's still striking differences in view between Beijing and Washington, but nevertheless, they're focusing more on overall context of Sino-American relations, which they made a big improvement.
So still there is a big gulf between the United States.
Yes.
Okay, if we can turn to the economic issues that they discussed during the summit meeting, they talked about the issues about foreign exchange rates and trade imbalances, but their positions with regard to these issues had been so adamant to the extent that people are saying that they are fighting war, they are fighting economic war over these issues. So did they make any breakthrough? I mean, I know that they didn't make any breakthrough, so did they make any compromise? If they did make any compromise, what kinds of compromise?
I certainly didn't see any significant compromise, and it wasn't really surprising that they didn't make very much headway because, you know, the United States, as most American journalists have been emphasizing over the past few weeks, is just too heavily indebted to China to be able to exert significant pressure on it. And inside the United States itself, you have a lot of disagreement about, you know, what really is the problem in the trade relations between the two countries. You have a lot of American opinion makers saying too much attention is being paid to the currency undervaluing issue, that this is just a red herring with which to distract attention away from America's own problems. So in light of that, I don't think it was surprising that not very much headway was reached. The Chinese did express a certain willingness to improve the situation in regard to respecting American intellectual copyrights and so on. But I don't think that's really going to amount to very much in the long term. And as for this $45 billion trade deal that they announced, again, that's not really that important when you look at the amount of money that American companies feel they could be making if it was a level playing field.
Now the summit meeting is over, Professor Myers, how would you foresee South Korea's relations with the two superpowers?
Well, yeah, I mean, the very fact that you're talking about two superpowers, I think, is important. I think just until a couple months ago, a lot of people weren't really happy or comfortable describing China as a superpower. And I think the one thing, the really big historical difference that we've seen from this summit is that the United States is really treating China now as an equal, as another superpower. Korea, I think, needs to realize that if it wants China to do certain things in regard to the peninsula, in regard to South Korea's own security, Korea cannot really rely on the United States to be the bad cop. In other words, Korea cannot simply make nice noises to the Chinese and hope that the Americans will plead more forcefully for South Korea's security in their own bilateral relations. If Korea wants anything to change, it really has to be more forceful to the Chinese itself. Whether it has the fortitude to do that, I think, is another matter.
Very briefly,
Yeah, I would agree that China certainly has risen as one of the two most powerful nations on earth, and starting off an era of G2 in the 21st century. And that has happened through ceremonial, there was a lot of symbolism in the Sino-American summit. And more than anything else, I think China has officially and recognized by the United States as a most powerful partner to the United States. That means perhaps we are moving into an era when the U.S. and China might exercise shared leadership or influence sharing, particularly on the matters that affect the interests of nations in the Northeast region. So I think that's what it is.
Okay. Thank you very much.
But nevertheless, I think it's better for South Korea to knowing this improved atmosphere, at least as of this moment, in terms of U.S. relations with China, rather than worrying about whether we're going to fall back into old era of Cold War, siding with the United States and Japan along, and perhaps on other axes with China and North Korea on the other side and so forth. But this would be a much better situation for South Korea to work both with the United States as a traditional ally, and then also improve some of the strained relations with China as well.
Well, gentlemen, this is how we're going to wrap up today's discussion. Thank you very much for your insightful discussion today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
No. The development of the relationship between the United States and China has huge implications both for regional affairs and the global community. With the two giants strongly vested in the Korean Peninsula, Korea has a challenging balancing act to play. Let's hope the outcomes of the summit spell the beginning of cooperation between the two powers to contribute to genuine peace in the region. This has been Kim Jae-chun for In Focus. Thank you for watching us.